What's going on, guys, and welcome to my first music tier list. Full credit, this idea goes to my buddy CP over at Willis Greedia. He's also going to be releasing one of these videos, so if you enjoy this and want to check out his opinion as another lifelong Alice in Chains fan, the link's going to be down in the video description below. So as I just said, I have been a fan of Alice in Chains pretty much my entire life. They are absolutely one of my favorite bands, and this is going to be an interesting ranking because I have some pretty strong opinions about a lot of these albums. I have no idea what the popular opinion is or what the generally accepted opinion is, so maybe there's going to be some hot takes on here, maybe not, but nonetheless, it's going to be fun. As far as the albums that we're going to be talking about, of course, all of the studio released albums, but we're also going to be talking about the two EPs, Sap and Jar of Flies, as well as the famous MTV Unplugged album. So starting off with their first studio released album, and that is Facelift. Facelift for me is one of the best albums of all time, and that's absolutely going up into S tier. There's actually times where I would say this is my favorite Alice in Chains album, and it's a very, very close race from another album that you'll see up in the S tier. And what I love about Facelift is that this was a really smooth transition from the 80s metal era into the 90s more grunge-infested era, and this album tends to have a bit of both of those flavors. Alice in Chains is one of those bands that I've never really felt fits very comfortably within just the generic title of grunge band. They've always been a lot heavier and had more of a metal edge than most bands that get classified as grunge to me, and I think that that's among the most prevalent in their first album, Facelift, to the point where Ozzy Osbourne even calls this one of his favorite metal albums of all time. And you get the gatekeepers that'll sit there and they'll debate the semantics of what's metal and what's not, but there is a much bigger, heavier edge to this album, and a lot more of an up-tempo than from the tune and from the approach that Alice in Chains takes in much the rest of their career. You got We Die Young opening up the album, which is one of my favorite just kick-ass short songs. Man in the Box, of course, is what the kids call a banger. That's one of the best, most well-known Alice in Chains songs. And even in some other tunes like, you know, Sea of Sorrow or Sunshine, you get a much different edge there. And if nothing else, what this album achieves, especially back upon release, is that it just says, here's Alice in Chains. And the world was just not ready for them yet. Next up, we've got the EP Sap, which was released between Facelift and Dirt. And this one, for me, I'm going to stick into the B category. It's a very good EP. It was the first of the more acoustic-themed type music that they started to be really well known for later on. And there's some really good songs on here. I mean, you've got Brother, which was the first song that Jerry Cantrell actually took lead vocals on in their career. Got Me Wrong, Right Turn, those are all great songs. The interesting thing about Sap is actually the history of the recording of it. So after Facelift, they were commissioned to do a song for one of Cameron Crowe's movies called Singles, and that was going to be the song Wood, which is the closing track on Dirt. And so they went into the studio to record Wood, and in the studio they came up with 10 other recordings, which made up the entirety of Sap and also made up some songs from Dirt like Rooster. And so in a lot of ways, Sap is really just a collection of B-sides from the Dirt album. And when you listen to it in that context, it makes a lot of sense, and it makes the album make a little bit more sense to me for why it exists. And the funnier part of the story is that the drummer, during the recording sessions, actually had a dream that they released an EP called Sap, and so they're quoted as saying they didn't want to go against fate, and so that's how they did this collection of 5 or 6 songs and put it out on an EP rather than trying to stick them on Dirt or leave them as B-sides for a later release. But it's a really good acoustic EP, not quite as good as another one that we're going to talk about, but very solid entries from Alice in Chains. And now we're at Dirt, and this is easily their most well-known album, their most popular, most celebrated album, and more times than not, this is what I would call my favorite Alice in Chains album. It's going right up to S tier. Very close with Facelift, though. Just depends on my mood. But Dirt, to me, is the all-encompassing example of all the different flavors you get from Alice in Chains. Alice in Chains has this heavy side to them, they have this very moody side to them, and they also have this very melodic side to them. And the best Alice in Chains albums, and even the best Alice in Chains songs, I would say, are the ones that find a way to balance all three of those in an effective way. And to me, Dirt absolutely sails as far as balancing all three of those. I mean, so many Alice in Chains songs that are in constant radio rotation that are the fan favorites are from this album. I mean, you got Them Bones, Damn That River, of course, Rooster, and Down in a Hole. You got Wood that I just mentioned, which is one of my favorites as well. Rain When I Die, one of the most underrated Alice in Chains songs. And this album is one that you really don't feel the need to ever skip a track because it's paced out so well. And it's spread throughout to where you have these incredible, like, career best songs by Alice in Chains all throughout the album. It's not front loaded, it's not back loaded, it's just kind of an experience all on its own. And Dirt is easily one of the most influential albums for anybody that grew up in the 90s.
It's alright, there comes a time.
Now we are at Jar of Flies, and this one goes right up to S tier for me for many different reasons. This, to me, is the greatest EP that has ever been released. I haven't listened to them all, but all the ones that I've listened to, this is the one where it just feels like it shouldn't even be considered an EP. It should just be an album all on its own because it's just so damn good. I mean, Nutshell, I've said this before, not something that a lot of you guys probably know, but Nutshell is without a doubt my favorite song of all time, written or recorded by any band. That is number one. I had a very surreal experience with this song the first time that I heard it, and every single time that I hear it, I kind of get a bit of that feeling again. There's not many songs that have that physical and emotional reaction from me, and so I just absolutely adore that song. It's my favorite thing ever as far as music. And you got Nutshell, you got I Stay Away, No Excuses, Don't Follow. I mean, these are all amongst the most popular and the best made songs by Alice in Chains. And it's the first EP in music history that was released and debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200. And that just tells you right there how powerful this album's impact was at the time. And to me, I would say still has. A lot of people would probably be surprised that love these songs, that they weren't released on an actual studio album. And Jar of Flies, to me, just takes everything that Sap was trying to do, kind of be a little bit more downbeat, a little bit more acoustic, a little bit more intimate, and just takes it to the next level. You know, they recorded this after they replaced their bassist for drug use, as funny as that sounds. And they just wanted to go into a studio and just kind of check out the vibes, check out how this was going to work, this new lineup of the band. And so they just went in with no music written, nothing prepared, and came out with one of the greatest collections of music that I've ever heard in my entire life. Now we are at the self-titled album, also known as Tripod because of the three-legged dog. And this is where it might be a hot take. I don't know too many people's reception of this album, but I'm putting it in C tier. I'm not a big fan of this album. Something just never quite clicks with me on this one. I mean, there's some good songs on it. You've got Grind, you have Again, you have Heaven Beside You, probably the best known song from this album, and certainly my favorite song from this album. This was in the era of Alice in Chains when Lane Staley was quite literally cooking his brain. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just look into Lane Staley, look into the band. But this was in the era where he was not the most present band member, not the most present force in the writing department. He was late or just absent altogether through recording sessions. And I feel like you can get a vibe of that when you listen to this album. There's just something that feels missing. It feels like a major piece of the songwriting, a major piece of the dynamic of the band is not as strong as it was. And I think that is Lane Staley's presence. It is his songwriting. You know, this was the first album where it feels like most, if not all, of the impact of the album, the writing, the recording, everything was on Jerry Cantrell's shoulders. And when I listen to this album, it feels not really one note, but it doesn't have the variety, it doesn't have the power, it doesn't have the dynamics of all of the previous releases. And so even though there's some good music that comes out of it, and I'm sure there's some diehard Alice in Chains fans out there that love this album for how different it feels, it's just never been an album that I've had the great experience with. You know, most of the songs on this album I'm very, very quick to skip if I'm listening to like an Alice in Chains compilation or a playlist.
Sand rains down and here I sit.
Now we are at MTV Unplugged, without a doubt one of, if not the greatest acoustic album of all time. This is going up to S tier for me, and there's a lot of things about this album specifically just because it's Alice in Chains and Lane Staley that just has a lot of power to it. This was the first time that they played live in concert in over 2.5 years since the recording session of their self-titled album, which they chose not to support with a live tour because of the problems that Lane Staley was going through. And this is also one of the last times that we saw Lane Staley live during a performance. And so there's something very surreal. There's something very dark and intimate about this that's just transcends the acoustic versions of some of their best songs. I mean, if you just take it on its face value, it's a great live performance. It's a great live album because it's among the best Alice in Chains songs, that all of which lend themselves very well to acoustic versions, even the ones that weren't written to be acoustic. They're just a band that can make that transition very easily, and the songs don't really lose any impact. You don't necessarily miss the studio versions on some of these. But the fact that Lane Staley, I mean, even on the album cover, he's like this shadowed silhouette. It's almost like his ghost is present during this live performance. That might sound strange because obviously he was alive, he was there, but he was barely hanging on. And he comes out, the crowd just embraces him, embraces the band. He gives this awesome vocal performance all the way throughout. It's an iconic video concert as well, if you could find that on YouTube. And something about this being one of the last times that we saw him just always has this special quality to it, this kind of haunting quality to it, that when I listen to it, there's something surreal. There's something that transcends past just the face value of them live on MTV playing these songs acoustically. So I love MTV Unplugged. For me, it is the best acoustic album of all time, and went up in S tier. Now we are entering the William Duvall era of Alice in Chains, and this is where I have no clue what the fan base's receptions of these albums are. For me, starting off at Black Gives Way to Blue, this was the first studio album that this band released since the death of Lane Staley. It was the first thing that they had recorded in over 14 years since their self-titled album. And I think this is a damn good return. This is a damn good album, and I'm sticking it in A tier. The only reason it's not S tier for me is that I feel the album's very front-loaded. All of my favorite songs are like the first 5 tracks and the final, the closing track, the title track, Black Gives Way to Blue, and there's about 4 songs there, the tail end, that are fine, they're good, but they're not songs that I necessarily would listen to all the time. I wouldn't feel like, I wouldn't feel that conflicted to skip them sometimes, and so I don't like it when an album's front-loaded like that. That's the only reason I'm not putting it in S tier. But the first 4 or 5 songs in this album and the final one, I think, is among the best Alice in Chains stuff. I mean, you've got All Secrets Known, which is a very good opener to this album, a very good introduction to this newer version of their sound. You got Check My Brain, which I think is an awesome single. You know, whenever this album was coming out, they released, not Last of My Kind, they released a Looking in View as the first taste of the album, which is a very heavy song, very moody song, and it really captures that later era of the Lane Staley Alice in Chains. And I liked it, and it got me excited and curious for the album, but when they released Check My Brain, to me, that really gave a flavor of this new era of Alice in Chains, and so I absolutely love that song. I love that riff, that like chainsaw riff. Last of My Kind, which is a song where William Duvall is fully prevalent as the new singer of the band, I think is a great song. Your Decision, one of the best acoustic, slower style versions that this band has ever released. And of course, Black Gives Way to Blue, which is a very emotional song because it's kind of written for Lane Staley. I think I remember even reading that Jerry Cantrell, he was putting off the recording sessions of this song because he knew how it was going to affect him, and he was sick for like a month after he finished recording this song. I don't wanna feel no more. It's easier to keep falling. Imitations of pale, emptiness of tomorrows. But I really do love this album. I think that it was a damn good return to form. These are among Alice in Chains songs that I will happily just fucking headbang to and love and will rarely skip. Just wish that there was at least maybe spread out throughout the album a little bit more power instead of it all just being in the first half, and then the last half is not as strong. Now we have The Devil Put Dinosaurs here. This was an album that I was very, very excited for because, as I just said, I really loved and was pleasantly surprised with the quality of Black Gives Way to Blue. Album was delayed for quite a long time, so it felt like it took forever to get here. And when it did get here, I was a bit disappointed. I'm sticking this one also in C tier. It's hard to put my finger on what doesn't click for me with this album. It's similar to the Tripod album, which is why I'm sticking it right next to it. I mean, you've got a couple of great songs here. I do like Hollow, I do like Stone, I do like Voices. Ironically enough, those were the 3 singles, so I think they knew those were the strongest songs on the album. This feels like where Black Gives Way to Blue was making a statement and William Duvall was put in the forefront a bit more, and they were showing a lot of different flavors in their music and taking things in a new direction in certain ways. This one feels a bit more, again, not completely one note, but not as dynamic, not as rich, not as much variety as their previous effort. And to the point where William Duvall kind of escapes into the mix a little bit more, and it almost feels like Jerry Cantrell is pushed more to the front of the lead vocalist. Now, he recorded lead vocals for most of the songs in Black Gives Way to Blue, but you could still really feel William Duvall's mix. You could feel the harmonizations, where I feel like in this album he's drowned out a little bit more. They mixed it to be a little bit more, to give the facade like it's almost like one singer. And I don't know if I like that. I like William Duvall being a little bit more in the forefront, the way that Lane was always in the forefront in certain songs. I think it's a bit of a disservice to him to hide him in the mix, that they Jason Newsteded him a little bit, in my opinion. To the point where it feels like the guitar is more the lead presence in this album than the vocals. And although Jerry Cantrell is fucking awesome, he's one of the best, and I love his riffs, I think Alice in Chains needs to have powerful vocals along with the powerful guitar. I think that something feels missing whenever they don't have one of those elements. And it's like Phantom Limb. Phantom Limb is a song where that's very much on display for me, where it feels like the guitar is leading that song and not so much the vocals. And it's got a great riff. It just doesn't really hit the powerful ceilings. The ceilings of that heaviness, that melodicness, that moodiness that I was talking about. It kind of feels more like it tries to sit in the middle of all of those. And the last thing that I'll say as far as this album, it feels like the album drags a bit because the songs overstay their welcome some. Every single song in this album is like 5.5 to 7 minutes long, and it doesn't feel like all the songs need to be that long. It feels like they're a bit artificially long. They don't really have like this quick, efficient presence like some of the best shorter Alice in Chains songs, and that's another point of not having the variety in the album that I personally like. All the songs feel like they're these long, drawn out, almost like epics, and it's just, as an isolated experience, I don't necessarily love the journey that I go on from beginning to end with The Devil Put Dinosaurs here. And finally, we are at Rainier Fog. This is their most recent release from was it like a year or two now? It might be even longer. The years are blending together now as I get older. This one I'm sticking in B tier. I like it more than The Devil Put Dinosaurs here. Obviously, I don't think it's anywhere near as good as Black Gives Way to Blue, so it fits very comfortably there in the middle. To me, I have similar criticisms to this album as the ones that I just gave for The Devil Put Dinosaurs here. But I feel like there's more variety. There's a little bit more of a different flavor to the songs in this album that to me is a little more digestible. There's a little bit more of an upbeat tempo throughout quite a few of the songs here, not quite as moody, not quite as broody as The Devil Put Dinosaurs here, and I appreciate that variety. Got some great songs like The One You Know, I think is a really good album opener, and I love the riff in that one. Rainier Fog, the title track's pretty good. So Far Under, Never Fade, those are good songs as well. And it's a little bit more range, a little bit more variety in this album. That's really the only reason why I like it a little bit more than The Devil Put Dinosaurs here. The one thing that I will say, though, is that almost even more so than The Devil Put Dinosaurs here, again, they're like mixing the vocals to be one presence, which is something that they always did to an extent with the early era with Lane and with Jerry, to the point where Jerry is very much an underrated vocalist because his vocals are more prevalent in all of their early music than people would like to think. But you could always, at least I could always distinguish between Jerry's voice and Lane's voice. And so even though they were blended together to have kind of this haunting harmonization, which was part of their signature sound, I could always feel the presence of one over the other. And I can't quite feel that with William DuVall and Jerry Cantrell. It almost feels like they keep pushing William DuVall in the background and keeping Jerry Cantrell a little bit more in the forefront. And though he's an underrated vocalist, I just don't think he's anywhere near the level of somebody like Lane Staley. I mean, very few people, if not none on this earth ever are or could be. But William DuVall, if you're going to hire somebody to be your vocalist, your new kind of presence for that side of the music, I think it's an odd choice to now kind of drown him out in the mix a bit. So, I don't know. I'm very mixed on this William DuVall era of Alice in Chains. I think they had a kick-ass start, but they have not really been delivering top-tier stuff for me since that album, and it's been quite a long time. So, I don't know. I want to hear everybody's opinions down in the comment section as far as those two albums specifically, but just the overall William DuVall era. If you agree with me, if you think that it's actually better than Lane Staley, or if you think that there's something else that just feels missing there, just try to articulate down below how you feel about the two different eras and where those albums land for you. All right, everybody, that's it for me. If you enjoyed this video, please click over here and check out Willis Gredia's tier list ranking and tell him that Cody sent you, see how his opinions differ from mine. I'm also going to stick a Godsmack ranking I did a few years ago up here. If you guys like this, please like and share this and hit the subscribe button. I don't do music stuff very often, but I will do it a little bit more often now. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean that you have to be.